This is Paul now. I think we can, since we didn't take as long in the speech language pathology practice committee, I think we can go right into the hearing aid dispensing committee if all the members are present for that.
I'm here.
I'm present. This is Karen.
This is Marcia. I'm here.
Okay, Todd, so I think we're ready to get started.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome to my first Hearing Aid Dispenser Committee meeting. I plan on mucking it up a little bit, so bear with me. We've already, I guess, taken roll. We only have 3 members of the committee. Shall we go ahead and take roll one more time? Marcia?
Here.
Great. And who's our other committee member? Karen?
Karen, I'm here.
Great. Now, we do not have a quorum, I believe. Is that correct, Paul?
Oh.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we can talk about things, but we can't decide anything.
You could provide board staff policy direction so that we can create
To move forward with
items
the
for
language that we might
considerations.
propose for the
Yes,
change?
that you
Okay.
might be able to vote on in the future when we hopefully have some more members.
Terrific. So our first on tab HAD3 is discussing the continuing education course content requirements.
Todd, just one thing. I think we still want to open it up for public comment for items not on the agenda. Sure.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yes, if we could open up for comment for items that are not on the agenda, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel, and if any member of the public wishes to make a comment, please type. I would like to make a comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions, and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is a moderator, and I see no request for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, so moving forward, item number 3, as I said, discussing the course content requirements. The genesis that came about why I wanted to have this in item 4 on the agenda is just looking at a way to open up the opportunity for dispensers to actually be able to get more opportunities for continuing ed. As we look at what is currently written, the hearing aid courses on actual hearing aids, equipment, devices, and other products are not allowed. And we also, and we're discussing whether or not we want to look at adding more or changing the ethical requirements for continuing ed. So I think it might be easiest if we just go down the discussion questions one at a time. Would that be okay with everyone?
Sounds good.
Okay.
It's good
So discussion item, good. And then maybe after each discussion item, we can open it up for public comment as we go along. So item number 1, as I just alluded to, the restriction not focus courses on equipment, devices, or other products. And is that overly broad? Does this limit our ability to get continuing ed credit for obtaining additional training on programming and post-fitting adjustment of specific hearing aids that could benefit the consumer? My concern is, in essence, my scope of practice as a dispenser is fitting hearing aids. That is what I do. The hearing testing is for the purpose of fitting hearing aids, and I fit hearing aids. Not allowing dispensers to further their education on the programming of the hearing aids, I think, can directly impact our ability to provide good service to the consumer and actually be able to help the consumer, especially when there's issues that they may have with their hearing aids and being able to problem solve. Now, once upon a time, we could do manufacturer seminars for continuing ed, and when the language was changed, that kind of went away, and I totally understood why that happened, because a lot of those courses were basically 3-hour infomercials for a particular manufacturer, and I never found that to be particularly helpful to me to further my knowledge or to help the consumer. So I understood that, but I think it has become so narrow now that we're leaving out courses that would have an actual impact on my ability to be a better dispenser. What's your thoughts on this, Marcia?
If you could speak to some of the courses that are offered through HHP, for example, that would not be infomercials, but yet would be considered informational for dispensers. I have trouble thinking of one. I don't mean marketing ethics issues like that, but can you give me an example of a course that you would like to see considered as part of this scope?
Well, what I would like to see would be courses on actually programming the hearing aids. There are courses offered through Audiology Online, which I believe is the largest purveyor of courses that people take advantage of. I think in the scheme of things, HHP is a relatively small provider. If you look at the overall number of dispensers and how they get their continuing ed, I think you'll find that the majority of them do it through Audiology Online almost exclusively.
Okay, I don't
given
want to quibble over that point.
Right.
I'm just wondering if, does Audiology Online then have courses that would not be manufacturer sponsored, would not be
Well,
commercials?
I think they're all going to be, at one way or another, they're going to be sponsored by the manufacturers because their training departments are the people that understand the hearing aids best and can provide the best information. So I think that in the end, there is going to be some manufacturer involvement, but I think it depends on what the course is. I have seen courses online that have to do with troubleshooting, that have to do with in-depth programming, that have to do with Bluetooth capabilities and how that can be used to enrich the customer's experience and the consumer's experience with the hearing aids and make it more valuable to them. I think any one of these areas is of benefit to the dispenser because it's a benefit to the consumer. If I have a better understanding of how to troubleshoot problems with an issue that a patient is having, that a customer is having with the hearing aids, and if I can solve that problem, I can improve their quality of life and I can make it more successful.
Well, I don't disagree with you at all. I think that this is a little too broad in that it does eliminate courses that could provide you with just the information you described. So I'd like to see us develop language that would allow those types of courses that are not infomercials, but we'd have to craft that language very specifically so people could understand what it is and isn't in terms of this related hearing aid manufacturer related talk. And that would take some work, I think, but I'd like to try to do that.
I agree. It's going to require some fairly targeted language, but I think it would ultimately be a benefit.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading the background and then the continuing education course content, the Title 16 CCR section 1399.140.1.
Mm-hmm.
And it mentions course content shall not focus on equipment, devices, or other products of a particular publisher, company, or corporation. Does that cover what we want to try to do? Like, have people know generally about programming or Bluetooth and whatnot, but not of a particular company or corporation, so it doesn't become like an infomercial.
Well, I think the issue with that is that they're all going to talk about a particular hearing aid. If I fit a hearing aid brand A, then I want to understand better how to program and troubleshoot for hearing aid brand A.
Okay.
Because it's going to be different than brand B, C, D, and E.
Is it really different, like completely
Yes.
different? Okay.
The programs are entirely different from one manufacturer to another.
Well,
Can you extrapolate from one to another? Yes.
great similarity in
There
some
are,
ways.
but there are certainly distinctive differences in how they react to different things. And which is why you have people that have a tendency to specialize in one or two brands
Mm-hmm.
and not all of them, because they can't know all of the different programs, know them well, at least.
Generally speaking, the reason that manufacturers provided these in-service meetings in the past was to introduce a new product. They didn't do it for any other reason. It wasn't to embellish your understanding of programming their existing products or how to troubleshoot. I mean, that was usually a part of it, but it was generally to introduce a new product and how to troubleshoot that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem with that language, is that if you let a manufacturer put this on, that is what they're going to do, unless we stipulate. And I think the manufacturing community would adapt to our requirements if this is what we would accept, to let them do some of it, but not be an infomercial, so providing the language is clear.
Right. Or we could even go so far as to maybe stipulate, just as a possibility, it just comes to me, only so many hours can be used towards manufacturing or hearing aids. If we were to say, for example, 3 of the hours could be focused on equipment or devices. So that way we're not getting someone who maybe does all 12 of their units. If we're worried about it, about people, possibly, taking advantage of it, we could also maybe look at limiting the number of hours to just that. Just as we already limit to 3 hours for indirect patient/client care courses.
Now, that does get back to the original contention that even 3 hours of an infomercial is 3 hours too many.
Well, I'm just saying as a way to possibly limit the amount. I don't think it should be open up. And we could look at something maybe where, they can't use that time to introduce new product.
They cannot, did you say?
Yes, cannot. I mean, I'm just throwing, ideas kind of against the wall, because there's a lot of different ways you can word it. But I think that we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater as it stands now.
But that
And I've perused Audiology online for a number of months, and there are courses that are, as the course syllabus is read, they talk about troubleshooting hearing aids, they talk about programming the hearing aids. There was a course a couple months ago on a Bicross, how to use a Bicross hearing aid. That was actually approved for audiology credit hours, but it wasn't approved for hearing aid dispensing hours.
Really?
Yeah. Now, of course, part of the issue I think we discovered was how it's written, because if someone already is a provider, and Sharice, correct me if I'm wrong, because we were talking about this briefly, someone who is already an approved provider of continuing ed hours, the way it's written, they can kind of put just about any course up. And that's maybe how that one kind of maybe theoretically fell through the cracks. But that course is a perfect example of a course that would be very helpful, because there's a whole segment of the population that could take advantage of a Bicross system that's allowing hearing on one side, on a side of a individual where they can't hear on one side, they transmit it through to the hearing aid on the other side. And, you know, that's very helpful.
Yeah,
And that particular course wasn't actually, it didn't say that it was product specific. So, you know, I think there's ways to get at what we want without necessarily swinging the pendulum back the other way entirely.
And just to interject really quick, Dr. Raju, I think that's something we'll want to look at the Audiology Practice Committee as well. I think the language, it was vague enough and potentially not be seen as that they're an approved provider. The course is about troubleshooting in hearing aids. That it should have gone for course approval, but maybe they thought that their PDP approval as a course provider allowed them to just teach these courses. Because of the way it was worded, it almost sounded like, well, it's not about a specific product or from a specific publisher, company, or corporation. So then I don't need individual course approval. But if it's about hearing aids, then it does. So I think that could be cleared up when we get to looking at the language and the continuing professional development language as well.
Okay.
So that they know anytime it's hearing aid related, it does need course approval. It's not just covered under their PDP license.
I remember the early discussions about this, Todd, when this was changed. And one argument was that just because we dictate what kinds of CEUs are acceptable, it didn't mean that dispensers couldn't go out and take those courses. They just couldn't earn CEUs for them. They could go to infomercial courses, learn about new products, all they wanted to. They just it couldn't be a CEU.
And I totally get that, but I think some of these other courses, though, that now are not being allowed would actually be of benefit and deserve to be counted towards their CEUs.
I agree totally. In fact, that you could not earn credit for a cross program makes no sense to me. Any kind of avenue of amplification that could help any given patient should be open, so long as it's not a product production or product promotion, I should say.
Okay.
So
are we agreed that maybe we need to take a little closer look and maybe look at some changing the language a little bit to make it a little more broad, while at the same time targeted, if that makes sense?
Inclusive, yeah. I'm in agreement.
What do you think, Karen?
I'm in agreement.
Okay. Could we open up for a public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will open up the Q&A. All right, the Q&A panel is now available, and if any member of the public would like to make a comment about this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference, and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is the moderator. I see no request for a public comment at this time. Mr. Chair, shall I close the Q&A?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
The second discussion item, I think we basically covered that in talking about item 2, additional areas of direct client care. I think what we were just discussing kind of directly impacts that.
Sorry,
Anyone have any comment on that section?
Here. I just wanted to go ahead and clarify. Currently, it only talks about the practice of fitting hearing aids in the direct client care course definition right there. So I didn't know if we wanted to insert additional words such as programming or any of these other.
Right. I mean, one kind of follows the other, right? If we decide to change the language to try to include programming and troubleshooting, I think we would probably have to then, by extension, change the definition, wouldn't you think?
In my mind, I could see where they might be separated, where one talks about prohibitions on course content that's related to specific devices, but that direct client care might have a broader definition to cover a few more things. That way, when staff are looking at course approval, that
Gotcha.
kind of tip them off better. So kind of adding the programming or other terminology that would be, these are direct client care courses.
No, I think both of those items are, by definition, direct client care. Would you agree, Marcia? Karen, what do you feel?
I agree with that. I personally feel like if we were to do list out things, we might miss something. And so when you were saying by definition that's direct client care, then I don't think we should list like programming, Bluetoothing, and all these things, because we might, miss something, and then somebody might think, oh, then I can't discuss this.
Limit it by making a line item of each individual thing.
Yeah, I prefer not to do a line item.
Does the committee think then maybe we should actually even make it more broad to talk about? Trying to think on the ball here, but direct client care courses cover current practices in the fitting of hearing aids and something about improving patient utility of the device. I'm sorry, I'm totally not in my headspace at the same time for this one, but something along those lines that it's kind of broad. I know fitting of hearing aids is pretty broad as well.
It
If
is.
there's any sort of like additional thing about improvement of consumers' ability to use the hearing aids, or if that just is covered under fitting.
I think it's covered under fitting.
Okay.
Yeah.
As long as it's understood by the broad community, I will not worry about that then.
Well, and I think if we go back to looking at back to item 1, where we're actually expanding upon what is allowed, if you will, for CEUs, I think that in itself will feed into the other.
Yeah, the practice of fitting a hearing aid it's not only placing this product on somebody's ear, but it's doing 100 other elements to that. I think people who fit hearing aids understand that.
Yeah.
That it isn't just handing it over, and it's many more elements.
That's the start of the process, not the end of the process.
Right.
And would we say that fitting of the hearing aid includes all the diagnostic hearing tests and things of that sort, so that it's all covered under there?
That's a good question, because it isn't exactly. I see where you're going with that, Charisse, that you can't fit the hearing aid without having done the diagnostics first. You can't successfully do it.
Right.
On the other hand, we have these differences in who can do what. Because when an audiologist does diagnostic testing for, they may come out with hearing aid fitting being the outcome of that particular patient's diagnostic outcome. But for a dispenser, that's not going to be their purview.
Well, I think, though, too, if you put in the language like you do, the same language you do when we talk about testing for the purposes of fitting hearing aids.
That's true for the dispensing population, but it isn't
Right.
true. When
No, but in this particular case, we're referring to just the dispensing population. Because this section just has to do with the dispensing population.
If that's all, it just says course CE course content requirement for hearing dispensers and dispensing audiologists in the third paragraph of the background.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh.
And I've put it broadly there, but it is the section that's in the hearing aid dispensing section. But
Yeah.
again, a lot of the references in the audiology section are going to reference you back to here. So
let's maybe table that for the moment. I think if we can tackle one, I think that will maybe make it easier to then tackle two. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm okay with one as is.
So Marcia, just to clarify, your discussion question number one, you're okay with it just what it is right now?
Yeah, I think the practitioner will understand exactly the scope of what fitting a hearing aid entails.
Okay.
So, and I agree with you that there is a danger in listing things because there's inevitably something that isn't listed.
Right.
Something's always left out.
Yeah. So question number two, I want to err on the side of being a little bit more broad and not not listing things, because there is a if we're going to miss something.
I would agree.
I just want to look up something real quick.
And just because I'm a public member, I'm not in this space. I actually Googled Bycross, and so that is a particular company, right, that does hearing aids.
No.
Are they the only company that does the bilateral hearing aids?
There are actually multiple companies now that do Bycross, actually.
Oh.
It's not specific to one company.
Okay.
That used to be the case a long time ago, a while ago, but the technology became open, the copyright became public domain, and then others got into it.
Okay.
Or patent, rather, not copyright, the patent.
Right. Because what I was going to say is, I mean, it would be okay for if that company is the only company that does this, then obviously they would be the one that would be presenting and doing the training, right? But if there are multiple companies, then
right. Yeah. Everyone has their own product. Everyone has their own way of
doing it. Yeah.
Programming. Everyone's algorithm is a little bit different. They're all right. Just ask them; they'll tell you they're right.
Yeah.
But because they do come at it from different ways, it is important to be able to have a good understanding of how that program works. So when someone comes in with a specific issue, you can address that issue and solve the problem,
right,
and not make it worse. While Marcia's looking that up, why don't we open up for public comment for the item two?
Question two, right?
Yeah.
All right, this is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A feature. If anyone would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists. You may also raise your hand, and we do have a member of the public raising their hand, so I will call on her. Just a reminder, you will have 3 minutes to give your comment with a 30-second warning, and so I will give you permission to unmute yourself. So you should, April Dolan, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go, you're unmuted. And April, you're unmuted. But we are not hearing you talk. And April Dolan, are you talking? You are unmuted. All right, another option would be to type your question in the Q&A panel. So we can't hear you, so that might be something you can try. All right, so she has, April has typed her question. She says she's the CE administrator for Audiology Online. And April, if you, okay, she says that she'd like to make herself available to answer any questions about AO specifically that may help this process. All right.
Well, thank you for
Yeah.
that. Appreciate that.
Sure.
And I think as we move forward, we, certainly any insight, from anyone in those situations would be helpful.
Okay, and I see no other requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay. It's closed.
Did you find what you were looking for, Marcia?
Not really, but let me ask my question under 2 indirect patient care courses for hearing aid dispensing, so not fitting but dispensing. It does say at the end, and managed care issues. I was wondering if there's any board administrator who knows how to define what that might mean, managed care issues.
Under which section are you looking at? I'm
Number
sorry.
2, under indirect patient care, indirect patient / client care courses,
Okay.
cover practical aspects of hearing aid dispensing. And there's a list after that. The last thing on the list is and managed care issues. I'm just wondering how you define that.
Oh, I see where you're looking at now.
One.
Hi, sorry, it's Karen. My internet was down for a bit. I missed number 3 or.
Oh, we haven't gotten that far, Karen. I was still asking
Yeah.
about the last part of number 2.
Oh, okay.
Under course content. I don't know if Charisse or Paul have any definition of managed care. I mean, managed care is broad, and I'm just curious how we look at that in terms of what falls under managed care issues.
I would definitely defer to Lisa Snelling, our licensing analyst, if she wants to chime in on kind of the courses that we might see. But I could see that managed care issues that are related to hearing aid dispensing might include those things such as coverage of the hearing aid. Sure, you can help clients get all of that covered.
Would it involve 3PA issues?
Not as familiar with 3PA issues. I'm guessing Paul would be a good person to chime in on that.
Yeah, this is Lisa. I'm not familiar with that term either, but as far as when we're looking at the courses, managed care would come into meeting the needs of the clients in regards to showing them how to care for the hearing aids, adjusting them, cleaning them, care of them. I think that's kind of generally what we're seeing in regards to managed care of the hearing aids.
Well, this isn't about hearing aids, this section. It's about dispensing and not fitting per se. Those kinds of issues you just said would fall under fitting.
Yes, okay.
And managed
If I could chime in, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say managed care is a very specific term, and
Yeah,
perhaps it's ill used here.
well, I was going to add that if we are going to use this is a good example of something that needs to be defined, because managed care is a broad issue, and I think in this context we're probably talking about healthcare coverage and guiding the client through whatever is related to that, whether it's a third party administrator or an insurance health insurance type issue.
Okay, that's what I thought it meant, but I wanted to make sure, and Lisa's telling us that perhaps they look at it when they're evaluating courses a little differently. So we need to spell that out better.
That actually dovetails right into item 3 on the discussion, where we talk about broadening the indirect patient-client care, and whether we should add legal or ethical issues. Yeah, managed care means something completely different to me. It's the insurance,
Mhm.
which in of itself is not necessarily a bad thing because there's a lot of insurances out there. I don't know of any courses available to actually, help us get information and navigating it. It's pretty much kind of you navigate it as you come across it. But yeah, I think just having a little more clarity on what that means
It looks like
would
April isn't on the call anymore. It might have been nice to ask her if Audiology Online does have any courses that address those
Yeah.
issues. It looks like she's not with us anymore. But my contention is, I think we need to spell out what managed care issues is internally and externally. Because it could be, I can envision, a growing number of courses on this issue. Oh, April's back.
I agree with that, spelling out managed care. If there
Right.
are, if somebody if right now we already found somebody already has a different definition of managed care than what our definition of managed care is. And my definition of managed care is insurance also.
Yeah. If April is back, can we ask her if there are any managed care courses on Audiology Online now being offered, or anything related to insurance billing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just given her permission to unmute herself, so April should be able to unmute herself in a moment. Okay, April, you're unmuted.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful.
Great, perfect. So yeah, I'm April Dolan. I'm the CE administrator for Audiology Online. And Joanne Slater is my boss. She is our director of CE administration for our family continued websites. And she might actually be the better person to address this question. And I think she has her hand raised.
This is moderator. Yes, she does. So I'm going to give her permission to unmute herself. So she should be able to do that. And then once she unmutes herself, April, if you can mute yourself so we don't have feedback or echo, that would be helpful.
Got it.
Thank you. Okay, Joanne, you're unmuted. Right, so Joanne, it looks like you're unmuted. So it looks like Joanne might be having some audio issues. What I'll do is I'll open up the Q&A panel, and worst case scenario, Joanne, you can type out a question or a response using the Q&A panel. You should see it in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can type in the field there and submit it to all panelists. Okay, so Joanne's in her car and has limited connectivity. So and she did clarify as a passenger, she's not driving. Okay, so it looks like, I mean, she's unmuted, but her mic's green, but it's not flickering as it does when someone is usually unmuted. So I think there's there is a connectivity issue of some sort. So I don't know if it would be better to pass it back to April. Yeah, let's try April. So April, you should be able to unmute yourself. There we go. Yep.
Okay, can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we do have some courses about insurance. I would say the majority of our courses are kind of what Todd was describing earlier. focusing more on how to use the products. There are definitely, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, there are a few that are kind of infomercially, but the ones that I find that our members really enjoy and that really get a lot out of are some of the courses that we produce and some of the courses that some of our manufacturers produce that are focused on how to use the products, how to address consumer complaints, and how to make sure that things are working the way that they're supposed to. And I'm wondering actually, Todd, because this is just going to bug me if I don't get the answer to it, but the cross course that you were referencing earlier that was approved for California SLPAB but not HADB, was it a 20 question text course? Just kind of
I don't recall. I don't believe it was.
Okay. So there was one cross course that we came out with recently that was a pediatric cross course. So that's why I was wondering, like, is that the one that he's talking about?
This one was earlier in the year, and it was actually a combination of, I think it might have actually been, as I think about it, a combination of adult and pediatric both.
Yeah, so anything that's pediatric,
Right.
yeah, we wouldn't be sending into HADB. But yeah,
But
we
we
have,
could get half a credit.
right. I don't think that we do have credits actually,
No.
but we do have a ton of great courses, and it is frustrating for me as the CE administrator when we get these requests from members who say, hey, we're looking for courses, we don't have enough, we need some for HADB credit. And you know, I kind of have to say, well, I'm sorry, this is what we've got, and I wish that we could give you guys credit for more, because there are some really valuable courses in terms of consumer protection on our website, but just with the way that the rules are now, there isn't a whole lot that we can do, unfortunately.
April, I think we were actually on a different topic about whether there were any courses related to insurance coverage or third-party administrators. Any courses of that nature?
There are a few. That's definitely not the bulk of our library, but yeah, I believe that we do have a few of those.
Is it on Audiology Online? Is that where you guys go?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I'm looking at it right now. There are 4 of them that provide like videos or text about managed care.
Yeah. So definitely not the bulk of our library. I mean, we have nearly 2,000 courses in our library. I think it's 1,700 right now is about the number.
Thank you, April.
Yeah, thank you.
And this is a moderator. Joanne did type a little bit more in the Q&A panel. She typed, we have many courses on the science of hearing aids that can be offered for ASHA CEUs that cannot be offered for California hearing aid dispensers. That is, they meet the requirement for ASHA, evidence-based.
Did she type that up somewhere? Can I
Joanne typed that in the Q&A panel.
Okay.
And then she added, but the rules for dispensers on product-based courses seem to assume that the courses are intended to sell products, and they are not. Hearing aid dispensers cannot bill insurance companies, so courses are managed on managed care would not be offered for non-audiologist hearing aid dispensers. Those courses are product-based courses, in parentheses, that are offered for ASHA CEUs.
Can I just verify that? That hearing dispensers cannot bill insurance companies?
That's not actually 100% correct. I have had relationships with insurance companies in the past and been able to bill, but that's certainly true for the vast majority of insurance companies. They will deal only with audiologists and not with dispensers, just as a general rule.
Medi-Cal certainly will.
Yep. That's one of the ones I was thinking of. but that's kind of, that's also going to be sort of California specific, since Medi-Cal is different even than Medi-K. But ultimately what we're looking at is, I think, just to kind of get a little bit back more on track, I think the real issue we're looking at isn't so much are there managed care courses available, so much as making sure the managed care issues language is clarified more.
Agree.
And going back to just if there's anything else we want to cover on item 3, the main issue there is, do we want to look at adding legal or ethical issues to be included in the indirect client care coursework definition?
I think we should. One of the reasons is because the cases that we see in seem to be some ethical lapse. What we see, and yeah, so I think legal and ethical issues should be included.
They are already included.
They are included, but I think what it's looking at is, do we want to make it its own issue, separate from, kind of pull it out from that definition?
And this is Charisse, if I can clarify. So right now there's a limit of 3 of the 12 hours in anything outside of direct client care. So if you want to do 3 hours in legal and ethical issues and some of these other indirect or hearing aid related issues, you can, but you can only go up to 3. And since a lot of the legal and ethical issues we see, it's interesting that legal and ethical issues would be in a category that's limited to only 3 hours. Presumably you wouldn't want all 12 to be on legal and ethical issues, but it's interesting that it would be lumped in a category that's so limited. So you couldn't do, you could only do 3 hours, and if you wanted to do 3 hours, maybe one's legal and ethical, the other one's on managed care, but it doesn't sound like there's too many of those. But also maybe the issues of medical pathologies that result in hearing difficulties. So, I mean, that's where this whole the limits on the types of hours comes into play, as well as the definitions. So since legal and ethical is in the indirect care and related to the discipline of hearing aid, both categories are lumped into the 3-hour limit. So I think the
then the
question is,
question
do you
would
want to
be,
limit that kind of?
right, do we want to pull it out and make it a part of the other 9 hours? Do we want to have its own little standalone category that allows you to have 2 hours of legal and ethical? You know, I mean, how far into the weeds do we want to get with separating these things?
Exactly. Especially considering the cases you guys are seeing in enforcement.
Well, I think the problem isn't that concerning the cases. I don't think the problem is a limited number of hours. I think the problem is people not taking any of them at all.
Can we do like keep the 3 hours for other things, but do a separate one that says 1 hour of legal and ethical?
I would even, this is Charisse, mention that some other boards do have a requirement that you take CE or CPD in law and ethics. They may not always require a certain number of hours, but that there is always some sort of CE hours course in law and ethics. And that's part of the CE audit process to ensure they're also meeting that requirement. And you could also take legal and ethical issues out of indirect, but also make a cap. So there's a variety of options depending on which way you guys want to go.
My only issue with requiring coursework in that category is I would want to first see how many courses are actually available at a given time to be able to get that requirement done.
Absolutely. And that would be the other consideration on the other side of that.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to make the requirement and then, okay, oh, and by the way, there are 2 classes all year you can get for this. So pile in.
Exactly.
Well,
unintentional consequence there, right?
Yeah.
California Academy of Audiology, at least historically, knew the importance of ethics, so they always made a point of including that. So they found providers and speakers on that topic, and when they were looking at their annual conference, I don't think they had trouble finding speakers.
I would want to make sure, though, that this is something that's available to the wide public. Having it available at CAA or even at HHP is great, but not everyone does that or has the ability to do that, to go to those conferences.
You mean the professional public?
You mean
Yeah.
making sure that it's available like online or something?
Yeah, because there's a lot of dispensers that get the vast majority, all of their hours through an organization like Audiology Online, because they maybe can't afford to go to the conferences or can't take the time off or whatever it might be, or travel to it. Mm-hmm. So it would definitely, it would have to be something that is, available to the broader community to be able to take advantage of.
Maybe that's a question for April or Joanne. How many courses they offer. I know Asha offers courses in that. I mean, I don't have a big dog in this fight about whether it should be part of the language or culled out and made separately. If there's any educational value to pulling it out and making it, stand alone in the language of the regulations, then perhaps there's an argument for it.
I personally think that's making it overly complicated.
Perhaps so, and I'm okay with the way it is.
Can I make a comment, please?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
This is Paul. I think that while we don't have to require a certain amount of courses, I think that what Charisse was trying to point out in the memo is that right now we're limiting it, and considering that it is a big enforcement problem for us, it would seem like as we look at consumer protection, we would want to at least allow someone to get credit for more than this limited number of hours.
Well, that I certainly have no objection to, because that also works towards the goal of providing a greater dearth of courses for people to be able to get their total number of hours.
Are you thinking
so? This is Charisse. This is Charisse. I just wanted to clarify that we will talk in agenda item 4 on some of these limits. So maybe that's informative. If we don't want to pull it out of the definition of one and make its own separate category, then we should just go ahead and in the next agenda item talk about the limits on indirect and related care courses and maybe loosening that up. So.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this then? Why don't we open up for any further public comment, and then we can move forward and essentially continue the conversation as we are having now.
All right, this is the moderator, and I've opened up the Q&A panel, so if any members of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type. I would like to make a comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or you can raise your hand, and I see that April does have her hand up. So April, I will give you permission to unmute yourself. And April, you're unmuted.
Hey there, thank you. So I've been kind of chatting offline with Joanne, and I think she has a lot of thoughts about some things that she wasn't able to get through due to connectivity issues. And if there's an opportunity, would be happy to follow up by email. I'm also new in this role, but she'll be happy to provide a more comprehensive answer to any questions that you might have that we can help with.
All right, thank you. And this is the moderator. I'm not seeing any further questions or requests for public comment. Mr. Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay. It's closed.
Okay, so item 4 is kind of what we were just sort of working into talking about. Any additional hearing loss or hearing related health issues that are not named in the definition of courses that are related to the discipline of hearing aid dispensing that should be added. Marcia, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm just looking back on page 1 of this memo, number 3 there lists different issues that I'm seeing in any of this discussion on the 2nd page. And that has to do with cultural and linguistic diversity as it applies to the delivery to diverse populations and so on. I'm just wondering if what the relationship from whoever put this together, I guess Charisse, between that number 3 and the number 3 and 4 on the 2nd page.
They are not linear. I apologize. The numbering of the discussion questions was kind of how I was going through my thoughts. They don't exactly relate to the regulation and the numbering in the regulation.
So what was the idea, that we should consider those issues in broadening?
And questions of whether we should consider revising the issues that are named. Should it be broader so there's not specific ones specified, or does that kind of cover most of the stuff? And that we don't want to make an exhaustive list, obviously. So, you know, as long as we're covering the big items that are kind of the discipline of hearing aids related to, or if we think there's a better way to say this, such as this, I think Joanne mentioned it, something about the science of hearing aid, something. I read that in the chat. So I think some of these issues are really great. I just didn't know if they cover most of the stuff, if some of them don't need to be in this because it's not an exhaustive list, it's just a list of examples, or if there's any broadening that needs to be done in this definition of related to the discipline of hearing dispensing.
Well, I do think some of the issues that are listed in number 3 on page 1 might fall into that. I would like to see some more language about that. I'm not sure how to weave that in. But I'm interested in trying to broaden our awareness of different populations with hearing loss. Have to work on how to do it.
Populations.
So to clarify, Marcia, are you, Dr. Raja, are you saying that item number 3, that we should expand on what the regulation reads already?
Well, I just think this is an interesting point of number 3, and it's certainly a topical area right now. And I don't know exactly how to infuse the current regulations with this knowledge or with this awareness, but I'm just thinking out loud that I'd like to find a way to do it.
And just for everyone's benefit that may be listening, I just want to point out that the item that Dr. Rajo is referring to is on page 1 of the memo. It's a regulation as currently written, and it's 1399.1401A3. And it does list some interesting topics there that we already have in our regs.
140.1 A3.
Yes, that's what you're reading from on page 1 of the memo.
Basically the bottom paragraph of the memo.
Yeah, I don't see how we implement that, but I'm glad. I guess I'm glad it's there already. It's just we don't do anything about it. We don't offer courses on it that I know of. Audiology Online accepted, but I'm just thinking out loud. So we can skip that issue.
And this is Charisse. Maybe Marcia, that's part of the. We can look at ways to talk about different populations and adding that in there somehow. But also maybe the cap of only 3 hours is also part of it. So oftentimes when there's a very limited number, you can accrue. Not that many people are going to offer as many courses on it, right? So maybe that's a intertwined issue.
So then that goes back to, do we want to add hours to that and expand it from 3 to 4 or 5?
Exactly.
I've not taken courses on audiology online. Are they in units of 3 or 4, or how do they do it? Typically,
This is Lisa. They're usually courses that are 1 hour, 1.5 hours, or 2 hours, but most of them I would say are 1 hour.
so if that is the case, then maybe 4 is a reasonable change.
I certainly think it's an area that deserves to have a little more opportunity to be expanded from an educational standpoint. I don't think it takes away from the other. I mean, you can have up to 3, up to 4, whatever we decide. And we're not saying it has to be those number of hours, but we're at least giving people the opportunity to expand their knowledge in what I think is a pretty important area.
Yeah, considering the point they're making is how many problems we have in this area. So I agree with that.
What do you think, Karen?
I'm fine with what you guys decide. I don't think 3 or 4 will be that much of a difference, actually. Yeah, yeah.
I do think it ultimately comes back to how many courses are actually available people could take advantage of. I don't know.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking
I mean,
too.
if we're going to say, let's let them do 7, but, we can only scrape together 3 in a given year, then it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, I just don't know how many of these courses are available.
But it's limited to, so it doesn't force people into.
No, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to. I would certainly be open to adding an additional hour to it. I don't think that's unreasonable at all, and I don't think that dilutes anything by any stretch of the imagination.
I agree.
It's fine for adding an additional hour.
Okay. So it looks like we've pretty much covered what we're going to on topic 4. Shall we open up the floor for
Can I
comment?
just go ahead and interject, Todd?
Yes, you may.
So the only last question I had, I just wanted to make sure we have a discussion on it, was whether there's any additional course subjects that should be identified as outside of the scope of acceptable course content. So at the top of the next page,
Oh, well, I was going to get
B.
public comment on item 4 and then go to 5, but
Gotcha. My apologies. I
that's
thought you
all
meant go to
right.
the agenda item 4.
You know what? You just keep pushing me along. That's fine. Moderator, can we go ahead and open up the floor, please?
Yes. So
Thank
I will
you.
open up the Q&A panel, and if any member of the public would like to talk about this agenda item or make a comment on it, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may raise your hand. We are displaying instructions for your reference, and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is the moderator, and I see no request for public comment at this time. Mr. Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
Well, then item 5, any additional course subjects that should be identified as outside the scope. So essentially, we're saying things we want to make sure we disallow.
Yes.
Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
Yes. So they're course content that is not allowed.
Okay.
Does that get us back into the list problem?
This one has been pretty small, typically, unless there's a broader category to go with. So currently, the ones that are limited, they're outside of the scope, and you can't have that as acceptable content is personal finances and business matters, marketing and sales, and office operations that are not for the benefit of consumers. It generally seems broad enough. I just wasn't sure if taking an, we're already opening up the section, so we should go ahead and take a look if there's anything that might also be out there that should be considered not acceptable. Because of course, if we're approving content or courses, right? We wouldn't want to allow other things that the board feels is unacceptable, but that we just don't know the board considers them unacceptable and just skim right through, right? So.
It isn't necessary to stipulate medical diagnostic testing that an audiologist might do that a speech pathologist, that a hearing aid dispenser is not allowed to do. Is it necessary to spell those out, or that's not what you had in mind here?
No, I wasn't thinking of that actually, but that is something you could have there, but I didn't think of that. I also didn't think of that one because if it was going to be one that's approved for audiology and the hearing aid dispenser,
yeah,
I wouldn't want to.
Since the statute covers both.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to disallow.
Hard to pick out.
Yeah, it would make it worse.
The only thing I could think of where we might want to add is right now it looks fine, but yet if we're going to break up the idea of what we can offer for dispensing, the troubleshooting and the programming, if we're going to break that out of the manufacturer group that's basically disallowed right now, are we going to need to go in and then put into this section those things that aren't allowed from the manufacturer? Or can we just leave it as we're going to allow these two things, and it's just, that's, as an example, we're going to allow these two things, that's it. We don't necessarily need to then give a laundry list of everything else that isn't allowed.
That's a great
I don't know.
suggestion.
I don't know from the legality of it if you have to do that, or if you're fine with just one and not worrying about the other.
I actually think that a good cleanup measure might even be moving the course content shall not focus on equipment, devices, and other products. However we change that, all of that should go into B, because B should be what we're not allowed. A is what's allowed, here's the topics, and then B can be what's not allowed.
I just wanted to make sure that if we're breaking it up, if we're going to start allowing some stuff, do we have to specifically then say what we're not allowing? Or can we just leave it as this is what we're allowing, and we don't need to necessarily get that, specific about every little thing?
It's certainly cleaner that way.
It is cleaner if it's there, and it also leaves us something to hang our hat on when someone is pushing to get things approved, and we have at least there's a regulation that says it can't focus on this exactly. So it can't be a particular publisher focusing on advertising or sales or marketing.
Right.
So that I think if we can clean it up that way, so there's something to hang your hat on when we do have to disapprove or not allow a course, that's important.
Okay.
That's where there's much more leeway in the it's allowed.
Charisse, do you have a collection of disallowed courses and course topics that has a historical perspective, so we can get an idea of the kinds of things people have attempted to pass off as a CEU possibility that have been denied?
I don't at the moment, but I think we could go ahead and look into that. That way we could have that for the next time to see exactly what they were. It would most likely be about specific products, is my guess.
That's fine.
So I know oftentimes we're telling them you can't focus on a specific product. You can't have it be about a particular hearing aid, so a device or equipment issue. So And oftentimes it's just that part's a big component of the course. So maybe the course topic is broad and this tiny little part is about indirect client or direct client care, but then the rest of it's all about a product. So we have to kind of go back to the, hey, you can't just
if
focus
it's
on
about
this.
equipment that has to do with fitting a particular product and software, let's say, that does that's one thing. If it's realier or something like that, that's also not product specific, but it certainly is equipment.
I would have to go look at them. I think the only ones I'm thinking of were actually by specific hearing aid companies is the one I'm thinking of.
Well, not that you need anything more to do, but it might be interesting to know what those denials were about if there's ever an opportunity to look.
This is
Let's see.
Lisa. We do have a list of courses that we could make available to the board for the next meeting. Usually the ones that are denied, as Sharice noted, are the ones that pertain to a particular product or they're beyond the scope of practice for a hearing aid dispenser. Usually having to do with tendonitis or something along that lines. And then of course we also get the ones that are team building or building your business, those kinds of ones, of courses are denied as well.
I would think the manufacturer ones would have dropped off significantly since we passed these regulations a long time ago.
They definitely have. There's very few that come in that way now.
So it seems though at the time being, we're looking at probably not messing with that language, leaving it as is. Is that an accurate summation?
Unless this list that Lisa and or Sharice could come up with tells us something we haven't thought
Right.
of today. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, for the time being.
Yeah.
That's probably a good, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We want to open the floor for any public comment on this item.
All right, I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. And if any member of the public would like to make a comment on this agenda item, please type. I would like to make a comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may raise your hand. We will give you a moment. All right, this is the moderator, and I see no request for public comment at this time. Mr. Chair, shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, the next topic.
Excuse me, Todd?
Yes?
I was just going to ask if we could take a quick bio break for everyone involved.
Don't steal my thunder. I was going to say, we have the next item, but I was going to ask if we can go ahead and take a little break for, say, a 10-minute break.
That's fine.
Is that good with everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So meet back at 2:45?
Yeah.
Great. In any given month, you'd be lucky to find maybe 3 courses or 4 courses that are live. This month, there's none. One month there were 5, but I had already taken 2 of those last year, so I couldn't take them again this year because you're not allowed to take them, the same course every 2 years. So the number of courses are significantly limited. I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight which way we go with this, but I think it's something we do need to have a conversation, especially since the audiology side is having this conversation at the same time. So when we look at the discussion questions, do we want to take a minute for everyone to kind of look through just real quickly in the memo, the continuing education requirement, section 1399.140 as it's written?
I'm okay to continue.
Okay. So discussion 1, the limitation of 3 hours of CE and related or indirect client care courses too restrictive.
Did we discuss this on the last one to make it 4 hours?
Well, what we're looking, yeah, I mean, I was going to say this is basically, we had a fairly good conversation about this already, limiting 3 hours to the indirect client care. So we've already talked about adding possibly a 4th hour to that. So I think we've kind of covered this topic already, unless someone feels like they have something further to add.
On the net, on several couple sentences down, should the limitation on related indirect client care course be lowered to 50%?
Well, which means then we would be changing the number of hours from 3 to 6.
6, yeah. So that
But I think we've already kind of agreed that we liked 4.
Yeah. Okay.
As a compromise.
Okay.
You have any further thoughts on that, Marcia?
No, I think we have covered it. It's really just the second section of that issue number 1 about more experienced dispensers versus new ones.
In regards to, I think she's just doing that. I think that's just there sort of as a kind of a reason as to why we may want to expand it.
This is Charisse. Yes, exactly. So the question of whether or not 75% of the CE hours need to be on direct client care as you further go along the career path here in hearing aid dispensing, does it help your practice and serve the consumers better to also be able to do maybe more of the hours on some of those related issues that you're seeing because more of the direct client care has been covered from not that you can't learn new things, and there's always new things to learn about direct client care and fitting, but just kind of that opportunity as, the needs of the licensees change over their, just providing greater flexibility, limitation,
I think that's
3 or 4 or 6, yeah.
Who's to determine, how many years of experience is necessary to call you experienced? What experience makes you a newbie? Would it depend on the program you came from? I think it's messy to try to do that.
Well, and I think that's why, just back to what we were discussing earlier, just opening it up to an additional hour and not making it predicated on your experience, just everyone. I mean, I think it's got to be for everyone to make it easier to manage.
Okay, I'm okay with that. That's because the issue of experience did not come into our previous discussion.
Right, and I agree with you. What's the demarcation? And now, from an administration standpoint, they've got to go back and look. Okay, how many years does this person have? Are they allowed to have this or not? I think that becomes really hard to manage at the board level. So I think it's easier and cleaner just to say an additional hour, as we discussed.
Okay.
I agree.
Do we want to open up the floor for any comment on that section before we move on?
This is the moderator. Would you like me to open up the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay. All right, the Q&A panel is now available, and if any member of the public would like to comment on this section, please type "I would like to make a comment," or you may raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. right, this is the moderator. I see no requests for comment at this time. Mr. Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
Item 2, concerning legal or ethic courses having their own category. I think we talked about this as well in the previous section.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, I think that's what led to adding the additional hour.
Yes.
Got it. Noted.
Hey, do we want to open up the floor again, please, moderator? See if there are any further comments.
Thank you. I will open up the Q&A panel, and we are displaying now instructions. You may also raise your hand. All right, this is the moderator, and I see no request for comment at this time. Mr. Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
Item 3, the possibility of opening up or including more CEUs as recorded versus live. And this goes back to the limited opportunity for live courses and whether or not there is a maybe a need to relax a little bit the number of live hours versus recorded hours.
Well, aren't we increasing self-study to 6 hours?
Self-study is currently 6 hours. It's 12 hours total for dispensers, 6 as recorded as it currently stands, 6 live and 6 recorded.
Can I just ask if Audiology Online has live per se courses?
They do.
Okay.
But they are also, at the moment, very limited. As I alluded to earlier, at any given time, you might have 3 or 4 available at any given month. And as I said, right now, there's 0 available. But if we expand the what is allowed for continuing ed, that could very well take care of this issue as well, because that may open up, you know, a significantly more number of courses available to the dispensing community.
I don't quite see how it looks. Programming and post-fitting adjustment of specific hearing aids. How that would look. I mean, they're, as we've already said, most of these infomercial courses are to promote a new product, and within those courses is how to adjust them, how to program them, what post-fitting adjustments and so on is typically a part of it. So how do you see, could you see courses that would cull out that piece of it and not have the infomercial part of it?
Well, I think there have been, and April can speak to this if she's on. I don't see. She is still with us.
This is the moderator. April is still on, so I can give her permission to unmute herself.
Okay.
All right, you're unmuted, April.
Hi there. Hi, thank you. So a few notes. I think we had discussed this before, and I know Joanne and I have gone back and forth about it so many times about the use of the word asynchronous versus synchronous. So when it comes to self-study, are you talking about synchronous? I guess I just want to clarify that.
I would say synchronous.
Okay, got it. So for synchronous courses on AO, The product courses that we offer are not infomercials. They are about the science of the product, and they are held to that standard because we have ASHA certification. We're an ASHA approved CE provider. So we have to make sure that our courses are not infomercials, that they are about the science of fitting the product. And follow-up courses about the science of how to troubleshoot the product. So if your focus is consumer protection, then really these courses are geared towards that. They are manufacturer specific because they're offered by the manufacturer, but they are about the science of it. So I don't know that it's fair to really classify them as infomercials.
Well, maybe that's a harsh term, infomercial, makes them sound very commercial. But to use the term science of it is also misleading. It suggests, yes, they do have to talk about their R&D in order to convince you that it's a better thing, a better mousetrap to be fitting these people with. So it becomes commercial even in the science of it. So it isn't purely, let's talk about the physiology of the ear and how this hearing aid taps that.
Right.
Only this hearing aid can tap that, and their hearing aid B does not. That kind of stuff makes it a little more commercial.
So I guess the ASHA guidelines about this are really, really compelling. And there's a ton of literature on ASHA's website that goes into this about what is required of courses that are offered by ASHA approved providers. And I think that would be really compelling for your purposes because science is the term that ASHA uses. That's not something that I've come up with. So I guess every course that we offer for continuing ed on Audiology Online crosses my desk. And I really do see a consistency across the courses that they are focused on the consumer about how are we going to make sure that this product is being used in the correct way for the fitting. So I don't see them, I guess, as salesy as maybe they used to be. Maybe that was several years ago, but the ones that we're offering are about the science.
Well, I think in a certain extent we're conflating the way it was when you go for a 3-hour session where they give you lunch and they talk about their hearing aid compared to what it is now going through something like Audiology Online or HHP or CAA, whatever it might be. And I think there's also a difference between a course that's introducing a product versus a course that's discussing how to troubleshoot and program that product. I think a course that it's an introduction, I think to speak to what you're talking about, Marcia, I think that could have a tendency to kind of run into the infomercially, if you will, kind of style. Whereas talking about how to troubleshoot something, how to fine tune it, and how to program it is a completely other animal. As a dispenser, I need to know the ins and outs of the product in order for me to service my client. Now, that means I'm probably going to have to talk to a manufacturer rep or training representative because they're the ones that know it the best. I don't think that just by nature that I'm talking to someone from the manufacturer suddenly should make that verboten. They're the qualified expert to get the information to.
It isn't forbidden in the least. You can talk to them till you're blue in the face. It's whether you can earn a CEU for it.
Well, I think that's what I'm referring to as in talking to them. Taking a course offered by someone who works for the manufacturer, I don't think should necessarily be just automatically disallowed just because it's coming from the manufacturer. If they're discussing the product and how to improve your patient's or client's experience, I think that has value.
Well,
And I don't think that should just be disallowed just because you're going to assume that they're just trying to sell you their product.
well, that's naive. I'm to be
I
blunt.
don't think so. I think it's understanding that they want you to use the product, but if you're already using it and you're trying to get better at it, then I don't think it's naive at all to want to get credit for learning how to better do my job.
And if you want to put it in those terms, that's true. But what they're trying to get you to do, and I'm in the same business that you are, if they want to spend time helping me learn how to better program it and uh, uh, meets client needs and so on, ultimately the bottom line is they want you to keep selling their product. And that's the reality of that. If they spend time with you, that's what their goal is. Their goal isn't altruistic. Yes, it does serve to make you a better fitter. It does serve the patient so that they get something better out of their purchase. But that doesn't mean that the motive of the manufacturer isn't to make sure that you continue to sell their product.
Well, but is it the motive of the manufacturer or the motive of me that matters the most? I mean, their motive might be to get me to continue to sell their product, but if the end result is I become better at that product and I can better help my patient, isn't that the end result that we're looking for?
You can do that. You can do all those things without earning CEUs for it, if that's
Well,
what your goal is.
I think in some of those situations you should be allowed to earn CEUs. If
Well,
it's a and we talked about this earlier when we talked about, okay, if it's about troubleshooting, if it's about the product itself, that should be allowed. That's what we talked about in the previous section, because we spent a lot of time talking about how do we delineate that, how do we word that so that we can allow some of these classes to be offered.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Mm-hmm.
Just for the purpose of staff and in guiding us on what our next steps are, we're on discussion question 3, and it seems like we went off track a little bit and started talking about some of these manufacturer type courses.
Real.
Are we still talking about programming and post-fitting adjustments and whether those should be direct client care?
I think we got off track because we were talking about whether or not we should allow more recorded courses versus live. And then I probably diverted us when we started talking about, if we can offer more classes that are available for CEUs, then we wouldn't necessarily need to change the current number of live versus recorded hours. And then that kind of got us off track.
Okay.
I have 2 additional thoughts about this. That when I used to go to these manufacturer-sponsored 3-hour meetings, I did feel like they wanted me to learn about their new product and start to dispense it and make sure that I knew I had all the support materials I needed to do that. And occasionally they would have a follow-up that would, if they didn't have a new product coming out, they would hold another follow-up to kind of bolster that initial meeting. So the follow-ups didn't necessarily mean it was new troubleshooting, new information in that sense. But I am also curious, I think April started to say that maybe they do have courses that are just in troubleshooting, that kind of thing, as opposed to new product bringing to market talks, if April's still on the call.
This is the moderator. I will go ahead and give her permission to unmute herself again.
I thought she said that.
Actually, I believe I did.
All right, April, you're unmuted.
Hi there. Yes, so we do have courses about troubleshooting. We have courses about new products. They're really across the board about how to fit and troubleshoot. They're typical courses by our corporate partners, the hearing aid manufacturers, usually are about candidates for the product, the science behind the product, How to fit and troubleshoot. I don't see a huge difference between the courses that focus on troubleshooting versus the courses that focus on how to fit and something that's new versus something that's old. They're all based in science. They're all focused on teaching the end user how to serve their patients better with that specific product. I guess, does that answer your question, Dr. Raggio?
Well, in a way, I mean, we still don't know what the difference is between the new product versus just a follow-up kind of talk. I'm totally unimpressed with this science idea. That's the manufacturers are not stupid. They learned how to put the right language in to make it seem as though this is not an infomercial when it is, simply because they put the word science in there. They were always doing that. I think the science, if you want to call it that, was always in their product development and design. So I don't think there's anything new simply because they state it that way. The other thing is, I don't think we should be looking at what ASHA does and making our model match what ASHA does, or AAA, or any other professional organization.
Well, I agree with that. That certainly wouldn't be the that never even entered my mind, actually. We can continue to talk about this, but let's reel it back a little bit to what we're talking, the actual topic, which is live versus recorded, and whether or not we want to look at expanding the number of hours eligible for recorded hours versus live hours.
Todd,
Can I just add something? I'm sorry.
Yes.
go ahead.
Okay, just on the issue of live and recorded, I just wanted to remind the committee members that the board did look at this issue and increased the number of self-study hours allowed for hearing aid dispensers to what it is today. So the same decisions that audiologists and speech language pathologists are making, whether to go forward with increasing it to 50%, the hearing aid dispensers were ahead of the game there, because we actually were in the middle of the regulations when we talked about this, and those regulations were promulgated. So hearing aid dispensers now allow up to 50%.
Is that, I'm sorry, I don't know their hours. Is that 6 hours then?
Yes.
Yes.
So it had been less.
Yes.
Yeah, it had been 3. So it has already been increased.
That was increased actually a few years ago, I believe, wasn't it, Paul?
Yes, that's correct.
How many years ago was that?
I'm going to guess about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
I think Allison was still the chair.
Yes.
So that makes it about 2 to 3 years ago.
I also want to add, because I hear this a lot, and we get a lot of anecdotal information from people in the hearing aid dispensers and in our other professions. I hear it on the speech language pathology side, probably more so, but we haven't had any issues with hearing aid dispensers being able to meet these requirements, even when we have done some of our audits recently. So I think we would probably want to go back and find out if in fact there is a limitation of these self-study courses. No, I'm sorry, the live courses that are available, the live or interactive courses.
In terms of the limitations, my question was to ask Todd, how many live courses has he taken and how many self-study courses?
Well, I can manage to get my 6 hours in throughout the course of a year.
The live courses.
It is absolutely possible. You just have to be really on the ball to get it. And but the problem is sometimes it may limit what I choose to take as a course. I mean, basically, I have to take whatever is offered. Not that there's necessarily a bad course out there, but you know, if there were courses available, you know, that there was more options of courses available there, you know, that would certainly enhance my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think changing the, and I don't necessarily think changing the hours is the way to go. 6 and 6 is, I think, relatively reasonable. But I hear from dispensers all the time and how difficult they have, and it is anecdotal, yes, but I hear, you know, frequently how difficult it is to be able to get the hours
Mm-hmm.
because of the limited number of courses that are available from month to month. And some feel that they're basically pushed to, you know, have to go to a conference in order to get the hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires time away from their practice. It requires a lot more money. And it can become it can have the potential to be a real barrier.
Okay. Do you find more benefit from the live courses versus, I mean, obviously
No.
live courses,
I
no?
mean, to be perfectly honest, no. It's,
They're both
you
the
know,
same?
yeah, it's basically the same. I mean, we could talk a lot about, you know, it's a more enriching experience. It's a more amplified experience because you can have the one-on-one with the person who's there on the other end of the line and ask questions. And yes, that is true. But I also think by and large, that's not something that's really taken advantage of. I mean, every course I sit on, you're just basically listening for an hour. And then at the end, they have a Q&A, you know, 5 to 10 minute Q&A or so, maybe longer, and then you're done.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was wondering.
But I don't want to necessarily use that as the reason for, well, we should just go more, we should go more recorded, because what's the difference?
Right.
You
Well,
know,
my thing is, how do we get more hearing aid dispenser courses that are more, you know, out there, that are beneficial, you know, whether or not it's live or not live? How do we just?
Well, recorded, there's plenty out there. I mean, right now, on Audiology Online, while there's 0 live courses available, I think I checked this morning, there are 56 recorded courses available. There's plenty of content.
Okay.
It's just a matter of whether or not it's allowed for CEUs, or I've already used my 6 hours up for recorded, so I need to find live.
Right.
It's the combination of these two things that creates the issue. They're not separate. It's not they're not sitting in a vacuum. It's the two things together that create this issue.
Todd, do you think it's possible that a dispenser could, if we increased it to, let's say, 9 hours, that they could take all of those in one sitting, pretty much?
Good God, the idea of sitting for 9 hours in courses, I would absolutely. I could think of 8,000 other things I'd rather do.
It may not suit you, but can you think of others?
Well, you could say the same thing for 6 hours, though. You know, I mean, it's you can come up with, you know, any number of, you know, scenarios to kind of paint it in what could be construed as a negative light. But, you know, I mean, I don't know if we can necessarily regulate all of that away.
Whether they do all of 6 hours in one sitting or 9 hours is a good consumer protection, is a good continuing education, if that's allowed.
So then, do we write into the regulation you have to do it on succeeding days, or then we just say, I mean, because in that scenario, then I guess we should say we shouldn't allow any recorded hours, and we should all just be live.
No, I don't think we have to do that. But I think limiting the number of hours helps with that, helps with increasing the more live, interactive type of experience that leads to better consumer protection.
Well, again, given the amount of interaction there is, I don't know if necessarily it does lead to more consumer protection or not. You're still getting the same information. I could theoretically, if they had, succeeding live courses, I could do them one after the other as well. But I don't know if it's necessarily going to make a difference from a consumer protection standpoint, whether I'm doing it all at once or if I'm doing it over the course of 6 months.
My experience with conferences when there's a live speaker is that almost all of them encourage being interrupted to ask questions during the body of their talk. And that leads to a lot of interaction. So I'm not sure what you mean by not much interaction.
Because that doesn't happen. I mean, that's true, but practically speaking, when you're sitting online and you're going through a course, even a live course, there isn't really any action between the presenter and the audience as a whole that's listening in.
So the live ones.
I agree with you, but I don't see from a practical standpoint, where that actually is happening to make a difference. Again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds because I'm not necessarily advocating strongly that we need to reduce the hours, but I think some of the reasoning behind why we have it is, while it sounds great and it makes perfect sense, I think in a practical application, it's another issue. It doesn't necessarily play out the way you're trying to map it out.
Well, I'm not trying to map it out. I'm just telling you my experience with it.
Yeah.
As you're, I guess, talking about yours, that I think I've taken one online course quite a long time ago, and we were able to ask questions. So I don't know what your experience has been.
Well, again, you can. The question is whether people actually do or not.
That's another matter. I don't think we can dictate behavior in that sense.
Well, my point is just being the behavior is the same, whether it's live or recorded.
Well, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
No. I take them. I take the courses. I mean, full disclosure, my primary. I'm a primary consumer of Audiology Online for my hours because I can't get away to go to the conferences and things like that.
What did you
But
do?
again, if we expand what we allow for continuing at hours, then I think it does make this whole point potentially moot.
Well, whether people partake of the ability to ask questions or not, it's still, if we're hedging our bets, I would rather have something that gave them the opportunity to ask and clarify than not give them the opportunity in terms of consumer protection.
Sure. And then we decide, then the decision is how many hours is that then? Is that, do we like that it's 6 hours? Would we feel comfortable with 7 or maybe 5 or 4? What's the delineation that we feel is in the best interest of the consumer?
Well, I think since we already increased it from 3 to 6, I'm not sure that was done as a consumer protection move as much as it was a professional protection move. But it was, because people have a lot of trouble getting there and it costs more. And, we recognize those problems and want to make it accessible to the provider. But I think 6 hours seems fair, up from 3.
What are your thoughts, Karen?
I'm thinking about this. I'm fine either way. If say, I'm just thinking during some live lectures that I've done during COVID, it all depends on the person, whether or not they decide to be engaging or not, because it's very easy to just, mute yourself and not not ask questions versus being there physically live. But now with COVID, it's really hard to be there physically live. I just, from a consumer affairs perspective, I'm thinking that it is better to have hearing aid dispenser training that's live. However, I understand the barrier for dispensers because it's if you only have maybe 6 to 10 live instructions a year, if you miss 1 or 2, then you're SOL. So I'm conflicted. I don't know.
Karen, this is Paul. I just want to clarify that live and in person are two different things. And in most cases, we have seen that there are more interactive online courses available because I think a lot of the organizations have had to make that adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in the year of COVID,
Right.
organizations like HHP, they went all online with a conference. I assume CAA did the same. But, in the next year or two, that's going to go away. Whether or not they keep that hybrid, available, which would be great if they did, but then it's, you're still talking about the expense.
That's true. What I wanted to point out is that the physically present isn't the requirement. It's just
Right.
live and interactive.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be talking at the exact same moment that you're listening.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
I understand that.
This is Sharice. I don't know if you mind me cutting in at the moment, but it does seem like everyone seems to be okay with the current 6 hours of self-study limitation. So there isn't really any.
I'm okay with it. Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah, I don't hear much of a consensus on moving that up or down. Just that 6 is okay for now. It's already there. And then the whole ability to maybe have additional courses that are going to count towards direct client care in the programming and troubleshooting arena, hearing aid dispensers might help with this issue of the small number of live courses that are currently.
Oh, is Joanne here? Would she be able to tell us?
She's not on the line right now.
Oh, okay. Any live
Um,
courses?
But there is something to be said once you open up the market for what can count, that people will fill that slot because, not to say it in a demeaning way, but when there's a market for something, often people will fill it, right? So if more people can take these courses based on a product's programming and so on, maybe that will help increase the number of live courses that are out there, including maybe, hopefully some more on ethics, right? So if we're not going to limit it just to 3 hours, if there's 4 hours, maybe somebody takes up the mantle of providing an annual ethics course a couple times a year. Updates the field on, changes in the law that affect hearing aid dispensers and ethical issues. And, it's not too uncommon to see that kind of taken up by certain places, at least coming from my last board. Some places start to specialize in it and they offer it a few times a year. And most of them are taking that course. So this could be something that's helps take care of itself question.
That's the hope. Any other thoughts on this topic before we move forward?
Nope.
Moderator, do we want to open up the floor for comment? Or
Thank
move
you,
on, please?
Sure. So I've opened up the Q&A panel, and if any member of the public would like to make a comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may raise your hand. We are displaying instructions. And I do see that April has her hand up, so I will give her permission to unmute herself. Oh, sorry, April, you were unmuted briefly, and now you're, let's see if we can do this. There you go, you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your time. I actually have to jump. It's 5:30 here, and I have a 1-year-old, so I'm going to be leaving. But if you have any other questions, I know Joanne was very keen to send an email follow-up if y'all would be receptive to that, just to help kind of explain maybe some more things about our site, or if y'all have any other questions that we can help clarify, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, so the last item, the definition for self-study is still appropriate and should be reevaluated. I think we all agree on the synchronous instruction, do we not? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller?
Yeah, I think that terminology
Yes.
is okay. I would just wanted to ask, I was looking at a regulation 1399.140B, and it does describe or what a self-study course does not mean. Would that help with this first question of, does the committee believe the definition of self-study is still appropriate, or should it be reevaluated or updated? Are you thinking that B is inadequate?
I think B looks fine.
And I think that's just staff's way of asking if the committee wanted to move to asynchronous and synchronous,
Oh,
or
that's
if
wrong?
because,
Oh, okay.
yeah, because this one is worded differently than the speech language pathology and audiology side, it does include more, and it does talk about anything that affords participants an opportunity to interact. It does talk about interaction, but it also says anything that's live counts. So anything live would be online or in person because it's live, or for lack of a better word, synchronous. So currently, I don't see a problem. I just want to make sure the committee isn't concerned that it's not going forward into the synchronous versus asynchronous model. And then, of course, once we get to the actual writing down of how we think this ought to go in some language, we'll also be working with our regulatory legal counsel, and they'll also help us with certain things. And it could become a question of, is live clear enough? So at that point, we might have to further define it, but I, of course, would defer to legal, and we have plenty of other questions to answer in the meantime on that one. So it does sometimes what was passed with the Office of Administrative Law in the past was clear enough at the time, and they didn't have any concerns or questions. And then sometimes when you come back through the next time, they're going to say, well, wait, you have live courses in here, but you don't define what live course is. So it was just kind of a question, since we're already working on the other side in the other regulation sections. Was it helpful? Is it necessary? And if not, we won't broach it now. And if legal decides that it is a concern later, we would bring it back, of course, and say, hey, they have concerns. They don't think it's clear enough. And then,
You know, some people don't know what synchronous means. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I think
And then you have to go to the trouble of describing what synchronous means, in which case, why even have the word synchronous? You've just described it.
except
Right.
for consistency, you know, then
Yeah. I
but
would
And
think
some
just wait
people
until
take
see what legal kicks back, honestly. I mean,
totally fine with that as well. I just know some people will say, oh, well, it's not live because it's online. I'm like, well, no, live can be online as well as in person. It just means
right.
I think
it's
we
just
should break
happening
it
at the
down
same
a bit
time.
more. But yeah, let's wait for what legal says, but we should consider that break,
Yeah.
you know, saying a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right. Well, as long as we are good with all of that, we can always address the rest of it later. We can take all of your guys' input on these questions, and kind of work in the background to kind of draft language that meets those policy discussions. And of course, get the additional input from others, including some of the classes that have been denied or courses that have been denied. Kind of looking to see if some of those fit into the courses we could potentially approve if they were more about programming, post-fitting adjustment rather than, but they were denied at that time because they were about a specific hearing aid or something like that. So that could also kind of be indicative of what kind of impact we could have on the future live courses.
Is there any other thoughts, questions, comments concerning what we've discussed?
I have a small thought. I'm not sure if staff is able to do this, but I'm curious to see what CEU courses other states are requiring for hearing aid dispenser. Like how many hours, what type of courses are okay, what type of courses aren't. It doesn't have to be all states, just a few here and there, just to see if we are on par.
Well, I can tell you that a lot of the states follow IHS guidelines. And they're pretty much wide open. You can do, all of their hours are recorded. Pretty much. I mean, you can do live, but they have no delineation between how many credit hours you can do live versus
and is it 12 hours?
Recorded. Well, it's different. That could be different for each state, but I'm just saying a lot of states pretty much follow IHS guidelines for testing, and I would, assume probably also continuing ed. So you could, very well come out the wrong end of that. I mean, I think by all means that's a good idea to look and kind of compare, but I don't think we necessarily, want to.
Am I digging
from
myself?
An informational standpoint, I think that might be interesting, but I don't know if we would necessarily want to take that as a, kind of a thing.
Okay.
That could be. Some of the states are pretty much the Wild West.
Yeah.
So would the committee like us to look
Yeah,
into
I think it would be.
or?
I don't think it would hurt to just kind of have an idea of what's going on.
Okay.
This is Paul. I
Just
think
wanted to
that
make sure.
there could be some type of comparison, but I could agree with Todd more. In some of this information, may be available through one of the national organizations already, and we can look for that. But there are different licensing requirements throughout the United States, and we would probably have to narrow it down to some that are probably similar to us, maybe regionally or something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay.
States like Washington are relatively strict. I think Nevada is relatively strict. Oregon, I think, pretty much is open.
I have no further comments or questions.
Okay. Great discussion. Thank you all very much.
Can we take a 5-minute break? I need to instruct my husband on what to do with the kids.
I think we're wrapping up, right, Todd?
Yeah, unless we have more to do, unless we wanted to carry some over from tomorrow into today. No, we're done on our end.
Yeah.
That's the last thing.
No, that's the end of our committee meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Are we going to?
You have all evening to tell them what to do.
We're going to reconvene tomorrow as a full board at 9 a.m.
Oh, cool. So we're done. We're not going to go through the.
Yep.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. That's perfect.
This
is far longer than my own wife wants to listen to me talk, so I'm sure you guys are all finished.
So Todd, we're adjourning for the day, right?
Okay. Yep. We are adjourned for the day. Back tomorrow at 9.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone, for putting up for me in my inaugural chair.
You did a good job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. See
Thank
you
you.
guys tomorrow
Thank you.
morning.
See y'all tomorrow. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.